Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be reviewing the latest release from J.H. Markert, and that is Mr. Lullaby. So if you've been on my channel for a little, if you've been on my channel for a little bit, I actually discovered J.H. Markert a couple months ago when he had released his debut horror novel under his pen name J.H. Markert. I think he goes by like J. Markert for more of his like historical stuff. I believe he does historical fiction typically. But he released a novel called The Nightmare Man back in last year, so early 2023, that had the coolest cover, and I did an instant cover buy. I was like, I am so into this. Like, I thought it was going to be like this really cool kind of nightmare fuel murder mystery style, like really intriguing like serial killer style novel. And while it was still sort of that, it was also very much a kind of, I don't want like quasi fantasy horror story mixed with like a crime thriller in it. And I really enjoyed it. I did really enjoy it. It definitely wasn't what I thought it was going in, but I really enjoyed it, and I really loved J.H. Markert's attention to focus in kind of creating his own lore and mythology around kind of like the dream world in that story. So when I saw this, Mr. Lullaby, Nightmare Man, Mr. Lullaby, I was like, ooh, maybe this is like a sequel. And while it's not, it is definitely set in the exact same universe and does make several references to the Nightmare Man, but you don't have to read the Nightmare Man to read this book. I also absolutely love and adore this cover. I will say that J.H. Markert's cover artist team is phenomenal, though it does remind me a lot of like Georgie from It, as well as if you guys have seen that Netflix show Dark, this also gives me like super dark vibes. Unfortunately, similar to the Nightmare Man, while the cover was super cool, I did feel that it was a little misleading as to what the story was about. And I will say that J.H. Markert does have a third novel coming out at the end of this year, called Sleep Tight, that also has a really cool cover. So he definitely is marketing with his covers, and he's doing a very good job, because I actually don't dislike his books. I do find the covers misleading, but I definitely don't dislike his books. I'm going to read the inside flap so we know what this one is about. The small town of Herod's Reach has seen its fair share of the macabre, especially inside the decrepit old train tunnel around which the town was built. After a young boy, Sully Dupree, is injured in the abandoned tunnel and left in a coma, the townspeople are determined to wall it up. Deputy Sheriff Beth Gardner is reluctant to buy into the superstitions until she finds two corpses at the tunnel's entrance, each left with strange calling cards inscribed with old lullabies. Soon after, Sully Dupree briefly awakens from his coma. Before falling back into his slumber, Sully manages to give his older brother a message. Sully's mind, since the accident, has been imprisoned on the other side of the tunnel in La La Land, a grotesque and unfamiliar world inhabited by evil mythical creatures of sleep. Sully is trapped there with hundreds of other coma patients, all desperately fighting to keep the evils of the dream world from escaping into the waking world. Elsewhere, a man troubled by his painful youth has for years been hearing a voice in his head he calls Mr. Lullaby, and he has finally started to act on what the voice is telling him, to kill any coma patient he can find, quickly. Something is waking up in the tunnel, something is trying to get through, and Mr. Lullaby is coming. That sounds like a really fun synopsis. That sounds like a very fun story to read. Whoever wrote that synopsis did not read this book. That's just like literally outlining things in the book that do not happen that way. And so like that really threw me off when I was actually reading the story, and I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure the book totally, like the synopsis totally didn't say that. But it gives you the general concept of what is in this book. And it was very similar to The Nightmare Man, where we are paralleling these kind of really interesting like crime stories with this kind of supernatural dream world. And I really like that. And now that I know going into J.H. Markert that that's kind of his thing, is this kind of dream mythology that he's created that is fully inspired by folklore from all different cultures, and he loves to reference the type of cultures that he is focusing on. It's just something that going into it and kind of having understood how he does his stories in The Nightmare Man, I definitely went into this way more open-minded than I think I would have been had I just, you know, read this inside flap and like gone for it. I will say there is a lot of nods to like crazy creative like serial killers in this. I thought that was really, really well done. I would love to see J.H. Markert write just a crime story a la like The Chestnut Man. I think he would be so good at that, and just kind of stepping away from his fantasy stuff to really just focus on like a really, really gritty crime thriller. I think he would do it really, really well, because one of the problems that I had with this book is there's a lot of crimes and a lot of detective work in it. And that was definitely the most intriguing part of the story for me. And he was very, very, very creative with his crime scenes and his antagonists. I just felt like they ended up getting kind of pushed to the side, or like put in as like afterthoughts, because he had so many concepts that he wanted to write about, and he just kind of had to throw them in to make the story fit, to make them fit into the story. So that was definitely a bummer for me, because I would have loved for this to honestly have been longer. I felt like this book could have been an extra 100, maybe even 200 pages longer, and really delved into all of the characters significantly more than they do, and I would have been much, much happier with the overall story, because a lot of it did kind of feel rushed, and a lot of it did kind of just feel like fate and blind destiny is leading all of these people to this like place for this story to take place. It was really difficult for me to get behind that kind of aspect of the story. I needed him to slow down and write more. Another thing that bothered me with this novel, and I don't hate this novel by any means, but one of the things that I really didn't like about this novel is I felt that our main characters were too young. I felt like they were way too young to be in the positions that they were. Our main characters are Gideon and Beth. They're both 21 years old. And Beth is the deputy sheriff of the town, and Gideon is a Purple Heart award-winning soldier who has returned back from the Middle East. And apart from kind of having this like weird like ships in the night like sort of romance tension going on, like they really act as very, very adult characters and are very, very astute in what they are kind of pulling out of these crime scenes and what's happening on the town. And I'm just kind of like, I don't necessarily think 21-year-olds would have that maturity level yet, like at all. So I definitely like, I mean, when we meet Beth, she's a deputy sheriff married with like a toddler. And she's like just thrown herself into her work. And I just have such a hard time believing that this character was 21. I feel like these characters needed to be at least like 28, 30. And I really don't think there would have been that much of a change in the narrative by just making these characters older. And I just kind of found the family dynamics between every single character in this book to be very, very strained. Like, nobody had a normal life. Like, everybody had these, like, awful, awful, awful demons. Gideon and Sully's family definitely had a lot of things going on. Beth's family had a lot of tragedy in it. Simon's family had a lot of tragedy in it. Maddie's family had a lot of tragedy in it. And then on top of that, there are all of these people whose family has been wrecked by an accident involving coma patients. And it's just like, oh, and Teddy, who is our like main antagonist, also crazy messed up family life. And I just really was like starting to forget whose family story was whose, because everybody felt so similar and everybody had these crazy dysfunctional relationships, and they were just kind of like a scene here and there to like remind the reader that that happened, but then it didn't like push that much forward about that character. So I found that really, really difficult for me to just like follow. And then another thing I have to say is Maddie's entire storyline, who's kind of a character who like is hinted at towards the beginning of the book and then kind of becomes a main character by the end. Her storyline really pushed my suspension of disbelief. I can believe in like alternate realities. I can believe in the dream world. I can believe in the monsters that come out of the dream world. I can believe in a lot of the things that Teddy does to get these crazy, crazy evil villains to kind of tag along with him in this like war in like the waking world versus the dream world. I can get on board with all of that. But Maddie being able to single-handedly convince all of these people to believe her story after literally knowing most of these people for like 10 minutes needed to be fleshed out. It was so difficult for me to believe that this character was able to get so many people to believe in another world with very little proof. Very little proof. Like, her proof was so minuscule in my mind that I was just like, the average person, especially like in like a remote small town in Nebraska, is not gonna just, and religious town, I have to remind you, like, religious town is not just gonna suddenly believe some of the stuff that Maddie is saying. And I just found it really, really, really weak story writing. Another big thing for me is every single one of these characters, all of our leads, would benefit so much from therapy. They would benefit so much from therapy. Especially like the opening scene with Gideon where we realize how much PTSD he has. Like, if his parents just simply went to couples counseling. There's like so many just like lacks of communication constantly with these characters that would have prevented almost all of them from being in certain very, very, very precarious situations that they get into. I was just like, Beth. Oh my god, Beth is such a weak character because she's so messed up. She's so messed up and we don't really see it in the book. And I'm sorry, but like, her whole character storyline is that she doesn't want to be a family woman. She's dedicated to her job. She wants to only pursue her job. She's always wanted to be a sheriff. Nothing is going to get in the way of that. But then she's like, I'm going to willingly have a child. But then I'm never going to be with that child. I'm going to perpetually push him onto my husband, and then my husband will resent me because I am too caught up in work. And I'm going to take pride in that. And the fact that that is her whole, like, mentality, and that it carries on into the end of the story, blew my mind. And then there's a twist with, like, how she ends up with the child, which just kind of doubles down on my biggest problem with her wanting this kid. And it's borderline inappropriate what she does. Like, she, completely out of character from everything they've built up about her, she does something very desperate and manipulative and, in my mind, morally wrong to end up having a child that she desperately wants for selfish reasons, and then just kind of is never, ever, ever, ever there for the kid. And I was just like, what is this gross storyline? Like, it felt so gross and inappropriate reading it. And it's not written as if it's something gross and inappropriate. It's kind of written as this, like, cute, like, lovey-dovey twist. And I'm like, this is wrong. Wrong. This girl needs to go to therapy immediately. Because if this is how she actually thinks, like, there is something wrong up here. And that is so gross and manipulative and inappropriate what she did. And I cannot stand by that because I am just, like, appalled by it. Yeah, and my problem with this book was, like, I was super into it until, like, the last third or quarter, I would say. I was really interested to see where the story was going. Like, the characters really hadn't been fully fleshed out for me yet, so I didn't have, like, as many reasons to kind of critique them, as I do having, like, finished the book. And then they just all kind of started spiraling into these, like, really unrealistic, uncharacteristic, kind of morally gray storylines, and I just no longer cared. But the writing really does carry the book. J.H. Markert, and I felt the same way with The Nightmare Man, is really good at writing captivating prose. Like, I didn't ever feel bored reading this book. I just started to dislike a lot of our main characters, and I started to feel like a lot of the story was rushed towards the end, and it didn't need to be. And another thing that I thought was really, really wrong about this book is we have one LGBTQ character, and for some reason, J.H. Markert decided to not only make that character, like, a truly unlikable, self-centered asshole, but also kind of glorified a recklessness from that character, in a sense, kind of glorifying, like, suicide after your loved one dies. And I found it really, like, your loved one dies, so you have nothing else to live for, and just kind of throw away your life. Like, that was that character's story arc, and I was like, why is that the LGBTQ character's storyline? Like, we don't need, like, why? Like, all you've done is written a character where, like, you talk about how much, like, people didn't accept him for being LGBTQ, and then you make him a nasty character, and then kind of, like, glorify his death. It just felt wrong. And I don't think it was homophobic. I just think that it was a misplaced attribute for this character. Like, I would have liked to see this character having redeeming qualities, or, you know, not be the only queer character in the entirety of the book. Because it just felt like kind of icky to me. Yeah. The other thing too is this book doesn't really have an ending. Like, I was like 15 pages out from the ending, and I was like, there's no way they can resolve this story that quickly, and they don't. And then I was like, cool, it's going to be like a series. Like, I wasn't expecting this to be a series, but I could totally see this being set up for, like, book 2. It's not. It's a standalone novel. It even says so in the afterword. So I was really, really confused by that, too, because we get absolutely no resolutions with pretty much any character except for, like, Gideon's parents. They have, like, a full open and closed story arc. And, like, maybe arguably Simon, Simon is actually, I think, my favorite character in this book. He was great. Yeah. I mean, and then you have Beth. Beth's storyline just really angered me, and she's also an awful person. Like, the fact that you're going to consistently call your best friend Giddy Up when his name is Gideon, and it's, like, the name that, like, the bullies called him, and you continue to call him that even though you know you don't like it. Beth is a terrible person. And then she's, like, all up in his business because he potentially has interest in another girl when you've just strung him along for your whole friendship, and you're like, I'm gonna ruin that relationship, again, out of selfishness. Like, Beth is a terrible, terrible, terrible character, and I kind of hate that she's, like, written as a hero in this. Though I will say, one of the things that I really did love is, I really did love that we have this other dimensional world, and we only get glimpses of it. I feel like there's so many times where you start in the real world in stories, and then you end up in the fantasy land. And I love that J.H. Markert kept it vague enough that we were never really in the fantasy land, but we got just enough to know what was happening over there without having to really be a part of that. I thought that was really fun, really cool, really interesting. It's something that I don't really think I've seen in one of these kind of, like, there's 2 different dimensional world stories before. So I really did enjoy that aspect of it, and I thought it was very, very clever the way that he used Maddie as kind of a fulcrum to focus on that plot point, and Simon as well to an extent. But one of the biggest plot holes that I found with this story is, and I don't want this to really be a spoiler, but you age faster in the other world, even if your body is still tethered to the main world. That's kind of like one of the caveats, one of the rules. And I was kind of like, a lot of these coma patients are kids. So, like, if they ever wake up, are they gonna be, like, a 40-year-old man in the body of a 10-year-old? Like, that's gonna be pretty weird. That's gonna be psychologically damaging. How is that explained? But it's not, because this book doesn't have an ending. It just fades to black right when it should, you know, be starting book 2. Even though I don't think I would read book 2, because I just didn't love our heroes at all. And I just, so many problems. Like, Gideon's entire relationship with his family would have been solved if, like, everybody in that family just communicated better. Gideon's whole relationship with Beth would have been better if, like, Beth had gone to therapy and, like, they communicated better. There's just so many moments in this story where, like, communication would have solved so many problems in this book. But I didn't hate it. This was a 3-star read for me. And what's a bummer to me is this actually started off as a 5-star read, because I was so interested. Teddy's whole storyline, I'm barely even talking about Teddy because I had no issues with his storyline. Teddy's whole storyline I thought was, like, wicked cool. I thought it was really, really intriguing. I thought it was a really fun, like, kind of look on, like, a potential bad guy, like, devolving into madness and, like, being corrupted by an outside force along with a lot of other similarly like-minded bad guys. And I thought they were all really, really creative and really, really cool, and I loved how their storyline tied back to the Nightmare Man, and that was fun. It was fun. And I really enjoyed that aspect, and I really enjoyed this folklore world of dreams that J.H. Markert is creating, and I think it's unique, and I think it's fun, and I think it's very, very easy to understand to an extent because he's laying it out in a way for the reader to really, like, get a lot of the more nuanced things that he is developing. And usually it's kind of difficult for me to read something like kind of high fantasy, and I don't really consider this fantasy because it is like horror adjacent. It's not a scary book, it's not a horror book, but the characters in it, especially the bad guys, are horrible people and they're scary people, and it's a scary concept. So I don't feel like calling this a fantasy book. I do think it is like this horror adjacent thriller with fantasy elements. And I did enjoy that part of it. I hated Beth. There's so much wrong with Beth. There's so much wrong with Beth. I can't believe her storyline. Yeah, and at one point there was just way too many characters. This book suffered a lot from the fact that there were way too many characters, and I feel like it really needed to be toned down because I was really trying to follow. It doesn't need to be toned down. This book needed to be longer, and it needed to have an ending. If we had that, I feel like a lot of my qualms, and we rewrote Beth entirely or like made her a bad person because, oh my god, she is so not a good person. I feel like that is where my issue with this is. And I don't hate this book, and I don't want to tell anybody I'm saying don't read this book, because if you liked The Nightmare Man, give this book a shot. I don't think it's as strong as The Nightmare Man, but I really like where J.H. Markert is going, and I really like his ideas because I think they're fun, and I think they're unique, and I think this is like a world where I could continue to read his novels as long as they kind of remain these like standalone stories where we get to see different villains from the dream world kind of putting their claws into reality. I think that's a fun concept. So yeah, 3 stars. Definitely not what I was expecting at all, and as much as I love the cover, I really wanted the cover to like be like a focal point, and it's so not. There's not even the train tracks anymore. Like, that was such a big... Whoever designed like the cover and like this inside flap, I don't think necessarily read the book, but the cover did draw me in, and that's how I found out about J.H. Markert from the beginning. So not gonna hate on their cover designer because I do think they're very, very cool. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, sometimes on Saturdays. I know this is going up on a weird day. Sorry about that. But if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah.